All right, continuing the discussion of prejudice. And before I begin, I'm going to just point out I've experimented with moving the lights around the room, hoping that I won't have so much of a shadow behind me. Hopefully, otherwise, the lighting looks good. It looks good to me. You know, it's always hard to predict what it's going to look like on the recording. We previously in previous videos, we talked about various definitions and concepts and terms related to prejudice. And so now I'm going to talk about some sort of less central concepts, but terms that it's good to know about to get a fuller understanding of all the different ways that we can exhibit this biased thinking. And so one type of prejudice is that, well, let me go backwards one step. With prejudice, we often think of prejudice as hostile, as sort of mean in some way. Like when people have prejudice towards a certain group, it's like they hate that group. Well, prejudice, you can be biased in the direction of thinking positive things about a group. It's still inaccurate and still can do harm, but it's, you know, it takes a different tone, a different quality. And so we are talking about benevolent prejudice. The word benevolent, it kind of means nice, kind. Benevolent prejudice is a perception that members of a certain group have positive qualities that should be praised and valued. You're still basing this on stereotypes. You are still assuming an entire group is more similar than it actually is. And it still leads to faulty thinking and faulty decisions. But it's not mean in nature. So some examples of benevolent prejudice. If you think that a certain racial group is particularly good at a certain activity, I always feel kind of icky when I say some of the prejudice out loud, but if people they see someone who's an African American and they're like, oh, I bet you're good at sports. Or even someone who's very tall and they're like, I bet you're good at basketball. They're just, you know, focusing on one characteristic or focusing on one grouping. Thinking that Asian Americans are particularly academically gifted or just likely to get good grades. I mean, I've even seen this in individuals who would probably value themselves as not being prejudiced, as, you know, well, I don't do those things, but they'll still exhibit the benevolent prejudice without much awareness. Like one time when I was grading a set of quizzes way back when I was young, you know, way back when I had my first class in the year 2000. And I was sitting there with my boyfriend, who would probably consider himself not prejudiced at all. And I was grading something and he was helping me transcribe the grades to a grade book because we decided to do it in the park because the weather was nice. And even though I had work to do, we just wanted to spend some time together. So I would like grade it and I'd call out the grade and he'd put it in the grade book. So at least we were spending some time together. That's nerd romance right there. And you know, I called out a student's name and it was a name where you look at them and be like, oh, that's probably an Asian name, and it was a C. And my husband's like, really? He's my husband now. He's my boyfriend at the time. It's like, really? They got a C? I'm like, yeah, write down the C. He's like, wow, I didn't know Asian students could get a C. And I'm just looking at him. I'm like, you know what you just said? That's prejudice, right? That's racist. He's like, oh, you know, in that moment, like, well, no, I'm not. Oh, yeah, I guess. And then he tried to explain himself. He's like, well, you got to remember, I went to Berkeley. University of California at Berkeley has a very heavy Asian student population. And he's like, and just everybody that I knew, they had to get straight A's. You know, there was a big deal that they had to get straight A's or their parents would disown them. I'm like, okay, I can see what shaped your prejudice, but it's still prejudice. And we will talk later about how sometimes stereotypes and prejudice build out of actual observations. But remember, an observation of one person or a few people does not tell you about an entire group of people out there. And I'm gonna go ahead and paraphrase the comedian Bobby Lee. You know, there's such a thing as average Asians. You know, that's just one type of stereotype. You know, when people think that gay individuals are like really good at fashion, and you get one, they're like, actually, I'm kind of a slob. Like, oh, what's a positive thing that I assume that about you? Yeah, but the thing is, just like with any stereotype, somebody's not going to meet the stereotype. You can't have a stereotype where everybody matches it because humans are too diverse. Humans are too diverse for that to happen. So when someone doesn't meet the prejudice, they are judged harshly. Like, what are you doing getting a C when I assume your group always gets A's? What do you mean you're not good at that sport when I assume that your group is always good at that sport? What do you mean you are not fashionable? I assumed your group is fashionable. You are not matching my stereotypes. That makes me feel uncomfortable. And so even though it's not mean in nature, even though you're assuming something good about a particular group, it still restricts what you expect of people. It restricts your ideas about what someone should be. Rather than going by the person's characteristics, you're going by your own preconceived notions, and that leads to harm. Benevolent prejudice, even though it is not mean, it is still condescending and paternalistic. So we should even keep our benevolent prejudice in check. All right, now I am going to use a specific type of prejudice for my next two. We're going to talk about sexism. And I'm using sexism as the example because it's what my textbook uses. It always works nicely to use the same examples and terminology that the textbook uses. It makes it easier for students to follow along in the textbook. It works as a nice example. Sexism is not the only type of prejudice that exists, but it works in this case. So we're going to talk about how you can have a hostile prejudice and an ambivalent prejudice, in addition to the benevolent prejudice that you can have. All right, so hostile, that's the more, mean quality. All right, so hostile sexism. Hostile sexism is where you judge a woman or someone who presents as feminine, all right, because remember with gender, it's more complicated than that. All right, so you judge a woman who does not fit the benevolent stereotype of gentle, pretty, kind, polite, and pure. So this is where benevolent prejudice can really backfire. You take on an almost punitive approach when someone does not fit. All right, so in this case, we assume certain things about women. I've had moments where I show up for class and someone's like, yeah, we got a woman professor. And I'm like, why are you so excited? They're like, women professors are just nicer. And the minute I have to enforce a deadline or something, like, we thought you would be nice. You were supposed to be nice. And I'm like, I'm still an authority figure. You still got rules in my class. All right. So, the benevolent stereotype is women are gentle, pretty. Oh my goodness. Do I have examples of people getting really offended when a woman does not look pretty, especially, women who are in the public eye. People are like, well, why are they dressed like that? And I'm like, yeah, but the male folks that they work with are not dressed fancy either. But they're like, well, can they just make an effort? Why are they not pretty? People get offended when they don't look nice. It is almost, my own father will describe it as if it's a waste. It's a waste for a woman to exist as a woman and not present pretty to the world. Okay. Kind. Women are nice. Women are kind. They're motherly. They're nurturing. So if you have to stand up for yourself, they're like, all right. I'm trying to watch my language since this is an educational video, but you know which word I wanted to say next. All right. Okay, shrill person. Polite. Don't stand up for yourself. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's fine. It's fine. No, you go. You go. It's okay. No, you stepped on my foot, but it's fine. I had no pain whatsoever. I'll just suck it up and keep smiling because everybody likes it when women smile. And if you don't, they're going to come up and say, smile, and demand that you smile because, as my dad puts it, women are so much prettier when they smile. And then I'll say things like, well, Dad, well, and I'm just picking on my dad because, hey, he's my dad. I have lots of interaction with him. Other people could be used as examples. I just haven't talked to them as much. Say, Dad, what if they don't have anything to smile about? Do you always smile all day long? And I'd be like, well, no. I'm like, yeah, why should women smile all day long? Because they're prettier when they smile. Why do women have to be pretty? People like pretty women. All right, the ideas are definitely there. All right, and then finally, pure. The purity ideal. Anything that's considered naughty dirty, debauchery. It's like, no, 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 no. Women don't do that. Women are pure. When we find out that women have been enjoying their bodies or doing something that's, you know, of questionable ethicality or anything, even though we all have our moral slips, and we hear a woman doing that, it's like, oh, you're supposed to be a lady. That does not fit with my stereotypes of you being the beautiful, pure, kind woman that you were supposed to be. All right, so the hostile part. This is growing out of a benevolent prejudice. The hostile part is when you punish, when you treat people harshly when they don't match the stereotype. We see evidence for hostile sexism in a variety of studies, in a variety of contexts. In the job context, women are punished at work when they don't meet the benevolent stereotypes, when they are seen as more assertive, or they don't dress pretty, they don't dress dainty and feminine, when they stand up for themselves, they are seen as impolite. Rather than assertive, they are seen as impolite, as rude. And so they get poor performance evaluations at work. In some cases, they'll do observations where they'll see that the same behavior in their male colleagues does not get treated the same way, that is seen as acceptable. All right. We also see that in cases of sexual harassment and domestic violence, people are more forgiving or more dismissive of claims, of accusations, when the person is seen to not fit with the benevolent stereotype. You know, like, well, you're not very pretty. Who would attack you? Even though there are plenty of statistics showing that all sorts of people who look all sorts of ways, who dress all sorts of ways, who act all sorts of ways, are victim of those acts, of those crimes. And we do find that we engage in more victim blaming of sexual assault victims when they don't fit the benevolent stereotypes of what we think a woman should be. What were you wearing? Well, you were dressed slutty. No, that doesn't fit with the purity stereotype. Well, you know, I don't care what happened to you, or maybe you were asking for it. You know, that sort of thinking. And this is more complex. You could definitely do more videos just on the victim blaming phenomenon. All right, but these are just examples of that hostile sexism. When we dislike a celebrity, when we make fun of a celebrity because they gain weight, or they're not conventionally pretty, or because they speak up, you know, people are like, why don't they shut up? I hate the sound of their voice. And it's like, why shouldn't that person use their voice? I don't, you know, basically the idea is, I don't want a woman who complains, who points out, you know, what's wrong with the world. I don't want a woman who yells. There's the term shrill, which was even given to the name of a book and eventually a TV show, and people, you know, will use that, be like, I guess I'm being shrill. You know, it's like, the idea is like, your voice should not go that high. All right, please be sweet. We like you when you're sweet. And smile, sweetie. All right, what's ambivalent sexism? Ambivalent sexism. Usually that word ambivalent means you're kind of uncertain about something. Ambivalent sexism is where you view the good women, the ones who fit your benevolent stereotype. You view the good women from a benevolent perspective, and you are only hostile towards women, or people you think are women. All right, you are only hostile to women who fail to meet those standards. So in the ambivalent sexism situation, you are favorable towards women as long as they fit your benevolent stereotype. All right, I am pro-woman as long as you act this certain way. The minute you are not acting this certain way, the minute you're not fitting with the stereotype, now I'm hostile towards you. All right? We see this in politics. Your classic example, and folks, I'm not getting political. I am not telling you, you know, who you should vote for or anything. I'm not talking about the way to vote or what the correct way to vote for. Let's just abandon all that, all right? But we have to use Hillary Clinton as an example because lots of research addressed Hillary Clinton. The research is available, and we all know who she is. If I pick somebody else, you may not know who she is. You probably know who Hillary is. Okay, so how did people view Hillary Clinton? A lot of people, if you just say, describe Hillary Clinton to me, a lot of people would focus on factors that had something to do with the benevolent stereotype of women. I don't like her, she is not pretty, you know. I don't like her, that she seems bitchy. I don't like that, you know, I don't like her freaking pantsuits. I don't like, excuse me, I need a drink of water and there's not one nearby. All right, excuse me. All right, had a little choking moment. I just hit the microphone. Sorry for that. All right, but basically, you know, I don't like. Other people also didn't like her husband. They didn't like that she stayed with her husband when there was evidence of him doing shady things, and a lot of people were like, well, you know, that doesn't fit with how I think a person should behave. There were lots of things that she was judged for, and some people judged her for policy, but a lot of people, if you ask them, what don't you like about Hillary Clinton, they would mention things that had nothing to do with policy. A lot of people would say, I just don't like her. I just can't stand her. Some people would say they couldn't stand the sound of her voice. They said that she seemed, you know, she seemed rude. She was a nasty woman. All right, that term, nasty woman, that fits with that idea of you are not the right type of woman. You are not, you know, what I'm wanting here. And I do want to emphasize here, yes, there were people who objected to policy and what she would support and things like that. I'm not pretending that's the only thing, but lots of people, that's what the main thing that they would come up with. All right. So, score in research, scores of ambivalent sexism. Scores for ambivalent sexism measures were significantly strong predictors of whether people intended to vote for Hillary Clinton. One significant predictor of whether people would vote for Hillary was whether they exhibited ambivalent sexism in their thinking about women. Did they exhibit this thinking where they were favorable towards women as long as they fit the mold, and they disliked women who didn't fit the mold? All right, that's not necessarily saying that's why they didn't vote for Hillary. It's a correlation. It was a predictor. All right, so for my classes, be familiar with the terms benevolent prejudice, hostile sexism, ambivalent sexism. All right, future videos, we'll get into whether we can reduce prejudice. Do you think that's possible? We'll talk about it.